Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the story of Jeremiah McCray,
Oh,
an
okay.
American serial killer from the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And we're using excerpts from a Wikipedia article as our main source.
Gotcha.
But as you'll see, it doesn't give us the full picture. So
Yeah.
the challenge here is, how do we use the limited information we have
Yeah.
to understand his life and crimes?
It's going to be like detective work, right?
Exactly, piecing together the puzzle.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. McCray was born in 1935 in Buchanan, Georgia,
Okay.
to a family of sharecroppers.
Now, for listeners who might not know, what exactly is sharecropping?
Yeah, good point. Sharecropping was a system where families would farm a portion of land
Mm-hmm.
owned by someone else
Okay.
in exchange for a share of the crops.
So not their own land.
No, not their own.
It's tough.
And it was really tough work, especially in the rural South during the Depression.
Yeah, I can imagine.
His family was large, potentially with 19 or 20 children.
Wow, that's a lot of mouths to feed.
Exactly, they struggled to make ends meet.
And that's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Right.
This environment, the poverty, the limited opportunities.
Especially for an African American in the segregated South.
Exactly. All of that shapes his early life.
Absolutely. And you can see it reflected in his limited education.
Yeah.
He only attended school for 3 years
Wow.
and never learned to read or write.
Yeah.
He ended up as an itinerant farm laborer, traveling from farm to farm for work.
Makes sense.
But the article mentions he'd resort to theft and burglary when he needed money.
Well, yeah, survival, right. Desperate times.
Yeah, I guess. But it's important to remember this is just one thread in a very complex story.
Absolutely. There's always more to it.
So let's shift focus to his crimes. His first known murder happened in early 1956.
Okay.
He was working on a farm in Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
and someone he knew suggested robbing a place in Anniston.
So he wasn't alone in this first crime.
Right.
Interesting. Was he easily influenced or already prone to violence?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore further.
Yeah.
The victim was 73-year-old Daisy F. Gilbert.
Another elderly woman, right?
Sadly, yes.
A pattern, maybe?
It wasn't just a robbery, though.
Okay.
McCray and his accomplice beat Miss Gilbert to death with sticks.
Brutal.
Her daughter-in-law, Esme Clifford, found the body,
Oh, that's awful. Can you imagine?
not only finding her murdered, but then being wrongly suspected by authorities.
And ostracized by the community.
It's just heartbreaking.
It really speaks to the fear and suspicion that followed these crimes.
Especially during a time of high racial tension.
Absolutely.
Now, the next murder was on July 1st, 1957.
Okay.
The victim was 86-year-old Sarah DeWitt in Washington Courthouse, Ohio.
Another robbery.
It seems so, but there's some confusion about the murder weapon.
What do you mean?
The article mentions both a hammer and a hatchet.
Huh. Interesting. Inconsistencies happen, I guess.
Yeah, especially with historical records.
We got to be critical of the information we're given.
Absolutely. And then, just a few days later, on July 4th,
Oh, wow. So close together.
McCray strikes again in Atlanta, Georgia.
Mhm.
This time it's a double attack. He confronts 53-year-old Robert Hanbury,
Okay.
beats him to death on his porch,
Oh, my God.
then enters the house and attacks Robert's 79-year-old mother, Carrie.
Oh, no.
He beats and stabs her, leaving her for dead.
This escalation is really something else.
Right.
It seems like it's more than just robbery now.
Yeah, something much darker.
Surely.
Luckily, Carrie Hanbury survived, but the trauma obviously stayed with her.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Now, jumping to January 1958,
Okay.
we're in Colonial Heights, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
The victim is 74-year-old Virginia Mecklin Stevens.
Another older woman?
Yes, and this case is particularly disturbing.
How so?
McCray broke into her house and hid in a wardrobe.
He was hiding.
Yeah, when she found him, he attacked, stabbing her in the neck,
God.
severing her spinal cord.
That's just horrific.
And what's even crazier is that McCray was actually questioned about this murder.
Really?
But he convinced investigators he was innocent.
Wow.
He even passed 2 polygraph tests.
How is that possible?
I don't know, but it shows his ability to manipulate and deceive.
A common trait we see in these types of criminals, right?
Yeah, it's frightening. And sadly, it was Stevens's son, Walter, who ended up wrongly accused,
Oh, that's terrible.
held as a suspect.
Unbelievable. The system failed on so many levels.
And tragically, the murders don't end there. On February 2nd, 1958,
Okay.
McCray, along with an accomplice named Rush Rieger,
Okay.
commit what might be his most horrific crime yet.
Oh, no. What happened?
They target 49-year-old Jeanette M. Griffin in Ladysmith, Virginia.
Okay.
And it's just brutal. They beat her to death with firewood,
Oh, God.
and they reaped her.
That's just pure evil.
It's a level of depravity that's hard to fathom.
I agree.
And this final act of violence is what leads to McCray's capture.
So it finally ends.
It does, but the story doesn't end there.
What do you mean?
There are still twists and turns to come, revelations that will complicate our understanding of this complex case even more.
I'm ready for it. Hit me with it.
We'll get there, but we need to take a break first.
Okay, I'll be waiting. So McCray's captured. What happens now? I mean, this is 1958, right?
Yeah, and the death penalty was definitely on the table.
Makes sense given the severity of his crimes.
He was actually charged with murder in both Virginia and Alabama.
Oh, wow, 2 states.
But authorities decided to go with the trial in Virginia first, since he was already in prison there.
Logistically, yeah, that makes sense.
Before the trial, though,
Right.
there's a big question. Is McCray mentally competent to stand trial?
That's huge, especially with everything we've learned about his background.
Exactly. So he was sent to a state hospital in Bowling Green.
For a psych evaluation.
Right. And 3 court-appointed psychiatrists examined him.
And remember, this is a guy with very limited education, couldn't read or write.
Yeah, how do you even assess mental state in a case like that?
Right, like, does he fully understand the charges, the consequences? Can he help in his own defense?
That's what they had to figure out.
So what was the conclusion?
The psychiatrist determined that while McCray had low intelligence,
Okay.
he could tell right from wrong.
So, basically, sane enough to stand trial.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
So, the trial begins. What happens?
Well, initially, McCray pleads guilty,
Okay.
but then he changes his plea to not guilty.
Interesting. Why the change?
It's hard to say for sure. The article doesn't really explain his thinking.
Right, maybe his lawyer advised him or something?
Possibly. Anyway, the change to not guilty means a jury trial.
And what kind of evidence did the prosecution have?
Pretty strong stuff. Eyewitness testimony, stolen items they found with McCray, even bloodstains on his clothes and shoes.
Damn, that's hard to argue with.
Yeah, it seems pretty open and shut, but McCray did testify in his own defense.
Oh, really? What did he say?
He admitted to assaulting and robbing Jeanette Griffin.
So, admitting to some of it.
But he claimed he couldn't remember raping her.
Trying to downplay it.
And he said he wasn't sure if he actually killed her.
Plain dumb, maybe?
Maybe, but the jury didn't buy it.
Yeah, sounds like they had enough to go on.
They found him guilty on all counts, sentenced him to death.
Wow, that's heavy.
The article mentions that when the judge asked if he had anything to say, McCray just said he hoped everyone was satisfied with the verdict.
Chilling, right?
Totally. Hard to know what to make of it.
Like, was it defiance? Acceptance? Just blankness?
Yeah, who knows. But his execution was carried out on April 18th, 1958.
At Virginia State Penitentiary.
The end of a dark chapter.
What about his accomplice in that last murder, though? Rush Rager.
Oh, yeah, what happened to him?
I mean, they both did the crime.
Well, Rager was tried separately and convicted of rape.
Okay, so not murder.
Right. He was sentenced to prison, but the article doesn't say for how long.
Interesting. Different fates for partners in the same crime.
Yeah, makes you think about how the system weighs individual blame.
For sure. But you know what's missing here?
What's that?
The victims' families. What happened to them?
It's true, the article focuses on the crimes and the legal stuff.
But we don't hear about the lasting impact on those left behind.
Yeah, a reminder that real people's lives are forever changed by these events.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember and honor them, too.
We've uncovered a lot about Jeremiah McCray, but there are still some big questions.
Like, why is this whole case so obscure? We need to talk about that.
Exactly. There's more to uncover. Let's dive into that next. You know, we spent all this time piecing McCray's story together, but
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder,
What's that?
why is this whole case so obscure?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
5 brutal murders.
Spanning multiple states, you'd think he'd be more well-known.
But his name's barely a whisper in true crime circles.
It's strange. I think to understand that we got to consider the historical context.
Okay, what do you mean?
McCray's crimes happened during a very specific time in America.
The 1950s.
Exactly. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, challenging segregation and racial inequality.
Especially in the South.
Yeah. So are you thinking what I'm thinking?
That McCray's race might have played a role in how his case was handled.
It's a tough topic that we can't ignore it.
You think his crimes were maybe downplayed or even ignored?
Because he was a black man targeting white victims.
It's disturbing to think about.
It is. But media coverage back then often reflected those biases.
Right.
It's possible his case just didn't fit the narrative they wanted to push.
Makes you wonder how many other cases like this are out there.
Lost to history.
Because the victims or the perpetrators didn't fit the mold.
And that's why what we're doing here is so important, right?
Digging deeper, questioning the official record.
Looking for those hidden stories.
History's never neat and tidy, is it?
Not at all. It's messy, complicated.
And often told from a very limited perspective.
Exactly. So what can we learn from all this? From Jeremiah McCray?
That's the big question.
I think it highlights how crucial critical thinking is.
Not just accepting what we're told.
Looking for multiple perspectives, considering the source.
The context, the potential biases.
We have to remember that even people who do horrific things
Are still products of their environment, their experience.
their circumstances, societal forces.
Understanding that doesn't excuse their actions.
Of course not.
But it can help us prevent future tragedies.
And history isn't just a bunch of dates and events,
Right.
It's countless individual lives, all woven together.
Full of complexities.
Contradictions. And by exploring even the dark stories.
We can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves.
And the world we live in.
This has been a tough deep dive.
Yeah, definitely challenging.
But we've uncovered some hard truths.
Grappled with some big questions.
Hopefully we've given our listeners a new perspective.
On a forgotten case.
And maybe inspired them to keep exploring the hidden corners of history.
Because those forgotten corners often hold the most valuable lessons.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Into the unknown. C4C43.